Hey guys, I'm Mr. Steve. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Today I'm going to teach you how to make an add-on in under 10 minutes. So, no, just kidding. This is actually going to take like an hour. It's going to be an introductory into serpents and visual scripting, and it's going to give you a foundation to stand on and give you some concept, design, and why things are done a certain way. So that way you have a good firm grasp on it if you do decide to spend $24 on this. And bless Joshua, who is a brilliant person. They sold 2,100 copies of this, got 47, I think, 5-star ratings. That's kind of tough to do, but it's an amazing program, and it can do virtually anything that you could do in Python, you can do here, because you can also put in script lines and attach scripts and all kinds of good things. So I don't get any money for the visual scripting add-on. I am not an affiliate. I'm just going to show you how to make it because it can get kind of expensive sometimes. And the important thing is that you do put add-ons into your workflow, or you're just going to be spending a ton of time doing things. Come on in and let's get this started. All right, welcome. So the very first thing you're going to see once you've downloaded and installed is something called the node serpents. Okay, and this is a visual scripting add-on. We're going to quickly go over how to set everything up so that you're successful and that your workflow makes sense. Once you've done all that, then you'll be able to start making add-ons. So as it comes out of the box, you can pretty much leave the settings the way they are. And the cool thing is you actually have a marketplace built in, some custom add-ons, packages, which are things you can add, which are preset nodes. You'll have snippets, which are codes, and you'll have extra add-ons that'll just help you do this. Now, before you get worried, I don't know any Python. You don't have to know a stitch of Python, not a single line of code. So first thing, I want to hit the scripting workspace over here. You're going to need this. For the most part, I don't really use this console. I use the console that is provided. So go ahead and join this area. And the next thing we want to do is we want to come up here and click this little plus symbol. What it's going to do is give us another workspace. So we can go to General, come down to Scripting, and double click right here, double click, whatever. Type in Visual Scripting. There we go. That's a lot better. Okay, so once you click New, you'll see this in the end panel. You'll have a list. It's kind of like geometry nodes in a way. You'll have your view, your group, which you don't mess with, the range, then you'll have serpents, okay? And so inside of here, you'll have a list of like your node graphs. So just to kind of contrast that so you have some familiarity, if you come over here into the geometry nodes workspace and press N, you'll see the tools, the arrange, and so on. And if we actually had a mesh in here, we could create new, and then you get a list. So whenever you hit new, it's the same thing pretty much. And then you've got the node wrangler, the arrange, the group, the tool, and so on. So you can change your node graph. And this basically is going to be a node graph. So if you came in here and if you put anything inside of this, this is now a node graph. Okay, so you have an output and an input, and you have intersecting nodes that are transmitting data back and forth. Now, back in the visual scripting workspace, this is going to be particular. Okay, the only thing you really have to do is learn the node names, how that they're arranged, and what they do. All of the code is going to be done for you inside. The very first thing you want to do is, let's think about it in terms of context. If I'm in the 3D viewport and I hit N, what is that? It's the N panel. It's called that for a reason. So if I come back over into the visual scripting workspace, that's a tough one to say, and hit Shift A/S and type in panel, I can now drop this node in. And this is one of many ways that you're going to build an add-on out and have it visually represented so the user can interact with it. And one of the big things that you would do right here is, and I'll press N to get rid of this for now, and actually real quick, we could rename this one, and you definitely want to keep these organized. I'll just call this main, and I can hit N. Now Shift A/S, what do you have in there? You have a lot of buttons, right? So I can tag in a button. And if I scroll down to the bottom, I'm going to have something called new category. And there's literally nothing there yet, but there will be. So we can actually connect these. And the diamond orange sockets, these are interface sockets. These would be just like if you're in geometry and you have the green geometry outputs and inputs, those don't really tag into anything else except for green inputs and outputs. And so if I tag this panel into here, instantly I have my button. But if I click on this, it's going to say no operator associated with this button. That means that I have not pasted anything in here, or I have not turned this into a custom button with an operator. And so here are just two of the main ways you're going to do this. So if I came over here and I wanted to very simply be able to drop a plane into the viewport, I can now right click on this and I'll see get serpents operator, because this is how this is going to work. You can either paste a preset operator in, and once that's copied, I'll come back here and go back to Blender, because now I'm deriving this operator from Blender. It's preset. Or I can make a custom operator. And so if I click here, it's now going to say add plane. And I'll have a list of possible functions for this, like the size, the calculated UVs, enter edit mode immediately upon putting it in, an alignment where you want this to show up, a location, and you'll have rotation and you'll have scale and all these basic things. And these are all presets that are kind of behind the scenes at all times. So now I can call this add a plane. All right, and that's going to change the name up here on the button. Also, I can choose an icon for this, which would be cool. So I'll just go to mesh, type mesh, and I'll grab the little Suzanne. So now we've actually got our first setup, and we now just successfully dropped a plane. If I can get this to line up. And if that ever happens, just hit 7 on the numpad, which will give you a top view, then kind of center the mesh object, and then you can middle mouse wheel up, and then it'll like move slow at more of a normal speed for you. So if I leave all these unchecked, it's just going to default in whatever way. But if I have this aligned to the 3D cursor, and then I put the cursor over here and click add a plane, it's now going to add a plane according to the view. So if I took up an orthographic view and clicked, well, let me bring it down here, and clicked add plane, it's going to come in orthographically. So you can do this in a myriad of different ways, however you see fit. So what we can do is we can just align it to the world, and we don't really have to do anything else. So if we click add plane, it's just going to come in the way it is. Now I do want this subdivided, so now we're going to have to add something extra. And this is where operators come in, so you can have something very custom, right? So I can take this button now and I'll just go to custom, and there's nothing there. So Shift A S, I'm gonna type in operator. And now this operator can be associated with this button. Right now it just says operator, but if I want, I can call this plane and then tag this in. Now that's gonna be locked in on this node graph. That's very important to remember. So if I have another one, and I have another operator, and I have another button, and potentially another panel, which isn't really how you would do it, but just for the example, and I tag all this in, and I want this custom, this is going to be under either node tree or main, and that's node tree or main, so you can choose the graph. So if I wanted this button to be over here, I could actually choose main, and then it'll show plane. And if I don't, if I just grab node tree, it's going to show operator, which is right here. So I'm going to take node tree and I'm going to delete that for now. Be very careful doing that. I'll just have to reselect main so it pops up. Now this is really cool, but let's create a save point. And so right now, I'm just going to go to my D drive. I'll call this testing 1, and it can be any name. It doesn't matter. Untitled works good. And now I've saved it. So if I crash, I'm going to pop up back in this. So now what you want to do is occasionally you're going to want to learn how to compile. I think that's more of concept than anything else. You're going to have to learn what that means, and you'll have a recycle button up here. This is actually going to allow you to compile. this button up here will allow you to force unregister the add-on. So if I click this button, it's gone. It's now unregistered. And if I recycle this, it gives you a warning that this may be slow. And now it's compiled, and you can see down here, it compiled successfully. Now, if you take this plane out and delete it, and then do a recompile, every now and then you'll get an error if you're calling for display data. So if you're trying to display something with this, Shift-A-S, you'll have display, and this is just the bare bones basics. If I want to display a property, it's going to say no property connected. And so I can now compile this, and it is successful, probably because there really isn't anything attached to it at the moment, but we will get to that. And you will have errors, I promise. So right now, what I want to do is build out this operator. And so we can come over here and let's add our plane in, which isn't going to work because I don't have the operator. So let's go back over here and hit Shift-A. And you can right click on the plane, get serpents operator. And now to paste that in, you can hit Shift-V. And Shift-V is going to give you the option to have either a button like we already had. And if you hit Shift-V again, and I just right clicked off to not apply it, I'll get a run operator. Now we don't use run operators that much. We use functions instead, but you can definitely build these out until you get your knowledge a little better. So I want to connect these as I would the interface sockets. And they will go color to color. So these are interface sockets, which are on the display side of the add-on, and these are going to be execute functions, which are kind of behind the scenes. And so you don't actually see these, but you can see these. And you can still display properties out of certain operators as well, through buttons and things. But we'll get to all of that. So now that we have that, we want to subdivide. So let's go ahead and we'll add a plane in because it works again, but now it's working with the operators. If I disconnect that and click add plane, let me delete that and try to add a plane, nothing happens, okay? And make sure I'm good to the world origin there. So I'm gonna go ahead and reconnect that socket so it works. So I'll add a plane, and now I'm gonna go into tab, and I want to grab a subdivision operator, and you can find these things anywhere you go. So if I go to subdivide and right click, it'll say get serpents operator. Now that doesn't work for a lot of things over here, which would be more of a data find panel, and I'll show you how to search for those pretty soon because that's going to be your bread and butter once you learn that. So Shift-V, once again, I want to run an operator because I cannot plug in an interface to an execute. You'll get a red line, and Control right mouse works. Make sure to save a lot because there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And if I hit N and I go to settings, I can come down here, and what I'm going to do is I could stretch this a little bit. I click debug nodes, and what's going to happen is you can see all the code that's going in behind this. Okay, so if you have something plugged into the wrong socket, it can't transfer that data, okay, because it's not written that way in the code naturally, okay? So we'll turn debug sockets off, and that's under settings. So if I go ahead and plug this in, now it's going to want to perform an edit menu operation inside of the object menu. And I'm just going to go ahead and save again. So now if I run the button, I'm going to get a big error. And it's going to probably tell you a trackback or something failed, context is incorrect, and you'll see what was going on down here. Now at this point, when you start getting errors, you have to kind of investigate that and figure it out. You'll get familiar with it over time. So if I click the console, I'll see up here it was compiled successfully, and this is happening in the background continuously. That's something you control. It's going to continuously compile, and you'll continuously get errors, and sometimes the screen will flip a million miles an hour if you're trying to do something that you shouldn't. So before you publish your add-on, you'll have plenty of information to get it right. But if I come back here, I've got a trackback and I've got a runtime error, and those generally mean that you're out of context. And you can't X out here You just have to click on the screen. Now, sometimes the console will come back, sometimes it will not. You can also clear the console. I generally don't ever clear the console because I want to know what those errors were so I can address them, potentially reference them later, because it's a lot to take in. So what I want to do is I want to enter edit mode before I try to apply an edit mode function. And in order to do that, I can just click enter edit mode. So now I've got a subdivision. Boom, just like that. I'll go back to object. I'm going to delete everything and start over. And so boom, there we go. We're subdivided again. Now, so you can see this a little better, I'm going to delete that, and I want the cuts. I want the number of cuts here to be something like 50. Be very easy to see. You can choose n-gon, quad corner, fractal along normals, and you have a seed value. Okay, so, and there's a lot else you can do with this. It's pretty endless. So now with 50 cuts, if I click add a plane, you now have a nice subdivided plane. And that's how I did it in the I2M add-on. This is very simple. It works very well and helps you have a very, very good clean mesh. Okay, and so now this is actually operating and doing what we want. And we now have an add a plane that jumps into edit mode and works only in edit mode, so it doesn't mess anything up. Now we're going to do just like you would in a regular node graph. Let's left click, select all these and hit Control J. Now we want to name this, so I'm going to click on the edge here and hit F2, and this will be my sub D plane. Now I can hit N, go to node, click color, choose whatever you want for it, and then I'm going to go to properties and bring up the label size. And if you don't begin with this practice, and I'll just save in the beginning, you're going to run into massive headaches. You won't be able to figure things out, and the more you do that, the better your graphs are actually going to be. Now I'm not going to put the panel, only button groups and display properties. A panel can have its own, and so it's identifiable, and at a distance I want it to be a memorable color, so I'll put it in purple so I know it. And from a distance, if I'm out here and I have, you know, like this many nodes, and this is not even close to what you're going to end up with once you get good, and I have all of this sitting there, I have no idea where my control panel is. Let's just say you didn't have any of those control panels, right? Well, then you're not really going to know where to go. And so I can actually just delete all these and make it nice and easy. And I'll create another save point just to make sure, because like I said, it's buggy, it's going to crash. It's just how it goes. Now, once you've copy pasted and moved things around, you're going to find out that once in a while you kill a button. Okay, and if it goes red right here, you're going to have a problem, because now this is named plane 003 and this is named plane because I made a ton of copies. And so if they don't line up, all you have to do is come back over and let me name this plane, and it's now going to come back to what it was. And now you don't have to rename it that way. You can just make a whole new name. But let's make sure that it's working. And I don't see it popped up over here. So what I'm going to do is a hard recompile with Shift R. And that will either bring it back or pop up an error. And so now I've got the add-on back. And so now I can add that sub D plane and everything looks good. So now let's do something even better. Let's go ahead and to make this look good, let's throw a box around it. So Shift A S, let's type in box and let's drop in a box. Now it's going to encapsulate that into an area which is more identifiable, and you can separate it. And if there's an animation, you can click on, if there's an animatable property, you know, like the XYZ, then you can click split layout and decorate, and you'll see that later. And I will show you that. Now, if you have other things in here, you can align it in a bunch of different ways, but that's all stuff we can get into. And then anything else that you put in the box is going to pop up in the box. If I connect this to the panel it connects outside of that box. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that, get rid of it, and create a save point. I'm going to say that a lot. So get into the habit of saving things. Now I can minimize this box and probably just bring it right here so I keep things good. Now, once you've got your add-on done, one thing you will want to do, try to remember this, hit A for all and H to hide. Okay, and the graph is going to run a lot smoother. Everything's going to run smoother. Okay. All right, so what we can do now is we can add a modifier and some preset properties, and it's going to be very similar to how I made the new bevel, the old and the new bevel magic add-on. So these are all properties in the background. So this right here, this area, all of this is it's a bunch of properties put together with set properties and an operator. So that way, every time you click this button, no matter what's going on in the modifier, it resets the properties to the default settings, which is a very powerful workflow and very easy to correct your mistakes. So if somebody was actually hard surface modeling and using my add-on or just anything, they just wanted a bevel on their mesh, it's going to be very useful to have all these functions preset, and then over here in the add-on you can modify those and then other pertinents. All right, so we end up running into a little bit of a problem. If we try to add a plane now, jump back into object mode, it has not been shaded smooth. So if I hit shade smooth, there it is. So what's going on here and why is it not working? Well, shade smooth is actually an object operation, not in edit mode. So if you're in object mode, you can shade smooth. If you're in edit mode, you cannot. So in order to rectify that, we need to grab this button right here and be able to switch it. So let's drop a plane in real quick and go back to object mode. And here's one of the neat things, and you'll just have to learn these things as you go through my tutorials and the other tutorials online. If you go into object mode or wherever you can to find this, and you just hover the mouse and you have Python, display Python tooltips on, what you'll see is bpy ops object.mode.set. Mode equals object. Okay, so you're like, oh gosh, I thought I was going to learn any Python, but don't worry, you don't. So just remember ops object mode. Okay, and so what you can do is you can now go up to the blend data browser, which is a really nice, powerful function. This is going to basically have all of the code in it. You'll have the ones you're going to use, going to be context, which would be 3D view, context, or view layers, basically, and active view layers, active object, active modifiers. You're going to have data, which is going to mainly, I would say, consist of all of this over here that you can't normally get just by right-clicking and grabbing it. Like if I add a shade smooth modifier, I could right click this and get the serpents property here, but if I right click here and just grab this isn't the right context. It's not going to give you the display that you can put in the 3D viewport on the end panel. It's going to give you the display property from the properties panel. So if you understand, it's going to only be able to, it's going to show you something that may come up as read only or whatever, and you're not going to be able to put that on the end panel. But you can put pretty much anything on the end panel, even though it doesn't make sense to do all of that. But it was under operators. So let's look again real quick to be sure. So bpy ops object mode. I come over here. I'll go to operators, and I want to look for the object. So I'll just type in obj. It's a smart search, so it's going to come up like that, and you'll see object. I already had it clicked down. So if you scroll through here, you'll see a lot of different things that are preset operators, and we don't use the operators in this menu very often. 9 out of 10 times, and not about 9.5 out of 10 times, you want to create your own operators, your own run operators, and make them yourself. You don't want to try to like dive into the bpy ops. You can call up the bpy ops, and it should be fine. But let's come down and let's find set object mode. All you gotta do is come over here and click this, and for some reason, there we go. Now it says copied right there. I'll do it again so you can see it. Set object mode, copied. We're looking good. You can minimize it or hit the X. If you're in the middle of a search, you can just minimize it so you can come back to it. So now I want to change the mode after the edit mode operation. So Shift V, run operator, drop it in, and you'll see it does this offset, which is super annoying. Let's see, where is that? Oh, the insert second buttons. You can turn that on. We'll need that later. Let's see, select view. I have only turned it on one time. Yeah, I looked right over it. Auto offset, turn that off. And then if we sever these connections, I'll get rid of the set object mode and reconnect this. It should not happen again. So Shift V, run operator, and it'll tag it in, but you have to move stuff. It's better than it shooting off because I create a save point. If you hit Control Z, it might crash serpents, and it's guaranteed if you hit it more than once, it's going to crash serpents. So you don't have Control Z, forget about it. You can't step back. You have to correct your mistakes kind of like as you go, or it's a nightmare, but I guess you could recover an auto save if you wanted to, but it's better just to keep like a milestone copy, like you made it to a certain place in your add-on that you could go back to, makes sense, and then save it as a new name so that you have a couple of copies as you go. And it is actually just better, and I'll delete this, if you have everything on an external drive. Now if we add plane, it's going to not only enter into edit mode automatically, subdivide it, jump back out, and shade it smooth for us. So now we've got something that's actually workable. And if we actually wanted to add a subdivision surface to this so it looks nice, we're going to need to add a modifier to it. So let's click open the modifiers. Doesn't matter which one, right click, and then get serpents property. And so let's go back over here, and what we can do is we'll make another button. It doesn't have to be in that box, it can be outside, it really doesn't matter. I can Shift D and make a copy of this, and I could even grab this because it's one set and Control J that, and then separate these in any way that I want. Or I could just throw this back in here, which kind of makes a little more sense to have a different color inside of a color, so that way it's very identifiable, like I was saying. And then you could label this if you wish. Now, before I connect this button, I don't want it to represent the same thing. It won't crash anything, but it's just the add plane again. And so what I want to do is I want to set this up with its own operator, because this is going to be a more intricate function. And so Shift A S, let's type in operator, and I'm going to drop it in here so it kind of makes a little bit of sense. So I will associate it with operator. So now these two are talking to each other and it's good. And I'll go ahead and plug that in. And what I want to do is change the name on this for sure. And I'll just call this sub D. I like to capitalize that D. So that's sub D. And in fact, if we want to get real fancy, I'll show you how to do something in just a moment. So let's see, what do we want to call this? We'll just type in modifier, and we don't get anything. So we're going to call this a subdivision surface. So let's type in subdivision, get nothing, surface. Let's see, what are they using on the sub D? It's that little square with a circle in it, and I guess that would be a little bit more difficult to find, but you can kind of select whatever icon you want. I'm not necessarily going to go through this and make the tutorial longer, but I'll just add a sub D right there. All right, so there are some things you could do to make the presets. There's more than one way actually to do everything. I can right click in here on the modifiers and get the serpents property, Shift V, and I can tag in add modifier, and I can choose a type from the list, whatever I want, and it's going to add that modifier as soon as I do it. So it would make more sense actually if I just grab the sub D, and where is that? There's a little arrow up. There we go. Subsurf. It's not actually the same spelling. So if I click this now, it's going to add a subsurf modifier, and there's actually nothing nothing really to it. It's not custom, and so you could easily confuse this with another modifier. So I'm not going to go that route. That's actually how I did it in the very beginning, but I don't do that anymore. The correct way, or the better way, would be once you actually have, let's go ahead and actually leave that in there because we're going to create context. So real quick, I do want to tag that back in, doesn't matter what it is, and I'll add that. So now that's here, I'll be able to grab this in context, right? This is now an active modifier. You see a little box around it. So if I come up here to any one of these and drop it down, this is pointing to the 3D viewport. So if I right click here, and it'll say copied and reloaded. Go back to Blend Data Browser. The reason we do this is because if you don't have it in context, you're going to get read-only errors, you're going to get trackbacks, all kind of stuff. And this says context 3D view header. It's very easy to get in here, and there's really not much in this blend file right now. It's very devoid, but I do want to go to the active object. And we only have one active object, so it's very easy to find, but later on it's going to get much more difficult. So what we could do is go to modifiers, active modifiers. We're going to see subdivision surface right here. And that's pointing to this one right here. And if you drop this down, you'll get all the data and stuff that you want attached to it, and you can pull that out and set those properties. But we're not going to do that. We're actually going to go and make our own. So we're going to grab new, and I can potentially grab this and move it if possible. That's a mess. I hate when that thing pops up there. All right, so minimize that, and I want to go ahead and get rid of this. I'll just delete it. And so now I can Shift V, and I'll have a new modifier node, and I'll just have to call it something and tag it in. So we can call this one the super sub D. All right, and whenever that modifier is created, it's going to be called super sub D. So if I click this now, we now have super sub D, but it came up as a data transfer node because we didn't change it. So you have to come here, and we'll go ahead and look for subserv because that's just what it's called. And now we can get rid of that. Click sub D, and now we've got a basic subdivision surface modifier with our own name. And so that's going to point to it every single time. So if you have a bunch of sub Ds on something, two at least, very common, and you have properties for one, you're not going to be changing the properties in the wrong sub D, because the sub D workflow is very important to have it correct. So now let's go back. We'll copy context again. Go to blend data, active object, and we can go to the modifiers object, and we've got the super sub D right here. And let me go to preferences. Oops, this is preferences. So there you go. You just learned something. This is preferences. You have to exit to get out of it. And then once you do that, you'll be back in the preferences panel as it stands. Now I want to find something real quick, and I think it's the perspective's throwing me off. It's a little too big. Interface, resolution, scale, and I'll bring everything up a little bit so you guys can see what I'm actually doing. All right, back to context, because it's still going to be the same context, nothing changed. But if you do change something, you delete anything, you're going to be pointing to something that doesn't exist, okay? And that's going to cause you some pretty serious errors. And come back in, and now I can actually grab this as a pointer, and I can just kind of right click here, Shift V, and I can drop that in. That actually points to the sub D. So if I bring this down, I'm now going to have all the options of what I would like to display on my subdivision surface. I do want the levels, I want the render levels, I want some of the advanced features and some different things. I want to grab the simple, so that can actually be changed. It pretty much kind of like a rebuild and then throwing in some presets with it. So if I scroll down, I'll see levels, I'll see type, and every one of these things, like pretty much everything in Blender has a type. And I'll show you see some debugging so you can properly grab that. So subdivision type, and everything's going to have a name as well. So I actually want to grab that name for later because we're going to build something out. I can grab the type just so I can show you guys. And we'll grab the render levels. And I'm going to drop that in. And I think I got levels, sub D, active object, set super D. No, that's the pointer. I'm going to grab levels, which is an integer. You'll see what it is. And I'll drop that in as well. I'll create a save point so I don't lose any of those. And I want one more thing for now, which is the subdivision type. And that's a string value. And that's just going to be simple right here. So I can now minimize that and I'll drop that in as well. So we can start setting these up. And once that's created, what I'm going to want to do is have it set some certain things. So that's the name. I don't have to have that right now, but I'll set the levels first. So Shift AS, type in set and set property. And now if we tag this in, the white socket to socket for the functions, we'll now have to actually change this to the value being displayed here. So this is an integer, and if you plug these in, sometimes you'll crash. So switch that to integer value, create a nice little save point, take the teal socket to the teal socket because it says property and data, and it's going to set this property. Now you don't have to change this because it's always going to point to our new modifier. So what I could do is I could just highlight this one, Shift D, make a copy, and the add-on is going to disappear until you put something in here. So we'll grab type, and type is a string, and you can see that indicated by the little blue socket. So if I come out here, you'll see string data, AB. Let's create this one, string, AB, and let's plug this in. Now it's not going to do anything until we tell it to do something. So let's pull up a little debug setup here. And Shift AS, let's get a print node, and you'll learn the print node now. This is going to be very helpful. Shift AS, get trigger, and plug that in. Now if we put the white socket to white socket here, and then we can grab a copy of this. Let's find out what kind of data this type modifier is putting out. If I plug this in and hit run trigger, it's going to tell me subserve because that's where it came from. And so if I take this type out, which I have subdivision type, which is the right one, and plug this in, it's going to print. It's going to print Catmull Clark because that's what's on right now. So let's set this to simple and print, and we'll see it now says simple. That's what we're going to have to type in up here in this value. And I didn't mean to plug that into there. That's supposed to go there. So this stays this way. So you can now take this in all caps, but it has to be exact, and hit enter. And now it's going to put that at a subdivision level of, let's just say 1, because we want to be safe with this. And we're going to switch it automatically to simple. So let's get rid of that. And let's add our new sub D with 1 level, and it did not go to simple. So we're going to have to debug a little bit and figure out why that didn't work. And it didn't work because I have type plugged in, which is incorrect. And so I actually need subdivision type, not type. So if I plug this in, teal socket to teal socket, come over here, I'm going to delete that. Actually, I want to put a delete button. So let me see. Let's grab, make sure I got the right one. Let's grab that as a serpents operator real quick, and you'll learn to do this as you go. I think right after the property is where I want that. So Shift V, put that in as a button. And it's not going to tag in properly because I actually want that on a row. Let's see, where did that come in? It came in right at the bottom. So I don't want that. I want another row node. And I think we'll just put it right before the display property. And then I'll take that off and plug this in here. And it should be proper now. And I'll create a nice little save point. I want to zoom in on my button and hit enter I want to delete the name out of there so it doesn't show anything. I'm going to go to the icons and I'll grab something like a little trash can here, which is down the bottom. And so no property connected here yet, but I now have a little delete icon. So if I create a sub D, I can delete and remove all modifiers. So you got to be very careful. And that can all be fixed up to remove individual modifiers by name and all kind of cool stuff. But so now we got a delete button in the add-on. So now with the subdivision set up here, we'll go ahead and click this on. It's now showing simple and 1 viewport level subdivision. If we come over here, put this to 2, I'll go ahead and delete that and add a plane. It's now subdivision 2, which is going to work out very nicely. So let's do some more work on this. And let's go ahead and add in another property. Don't worry, the add-on disappears for now because you're doing some stuff. And I have level modifiers here, and then I have render levels. Now I may want to display these instead of setting them, right? So render levels would be something you could probably set and be happy with, but let's make sure, yeah, it's integer. This is integer, so I want to switch this real quick. And I want to put this to say 5 because it doesn't really matter. So I'll delete that, boom, and then I'll add another sub D, and now it's set to 2 and 5, which is pretty practical for viewport use. Now I may want to change this property as well. So this can now be our display property, and I want to group these, so Control J, because they are together, and I want to come into this graph and know what's going on. And we can group these as well, and I could even move these outside and down because you want to kind of go left to right and then go down in code, because this was up here, but still it's my next line of code, if you will. So with that property, I did not copy it. Let me go back and grab that. I want the levels for the viewport, which is something you would change a little more readily, so you can kind of debug your setup. So Control C with that highlighted. I'll come up here to my display property, Control V. I'll drop it in, and I can put it right here. Now this is going to display those levels, okay? And then you can change. Let's see. You could change how this looks. If I align them, it's going to bring these together and make it look nice. I can also put an alert on that. Hey, these are subdivision levels, and it's a delete button, so be careful. Create a save point. I can also pretty this up. Click a line here. I can click a line here, and that'll kind of block all those in because you have a finite amount of room inside of the end panel. So you don't want to stack it up real bad. You want it to where people can drag it out but not have to use it. And I'm going to make an add-on one day to get rid of the navigate because I've never used it. I got to do that. All right, so the box can also be set if it doesn't have preceding code that is telling it to align and do other things. So like the last thing is going to tell it what to do, basically. Now for some instances, pun intended, you could actually add a slider. I wouldn't recommend that because it could go infinite and you are going to crash, but there are some different things you can do. You could throw Boolean checkboxes in here, which is very useful, like the optimal display. So if we want to add the checkbox, we'll just grab one of these, right click, and get serpents property. We'll see how this is going to work out. So Shift AS, you type in display, PRO, and it'll just kind of populate that list for you. Let's grab another display property, and this could be our next line of code down. And so I want to grab the next thing in the column because I want it to be underneath that, and I'm going to tag that in. So now I've got no property displayed here, but if I hit Control V, it's going to pop up with the Boolean property. And so if I tag this in, I'll now have the little Boolean checkbox here, and you see it is controlling for the optimal display. And if it doesn't by chance, then you don't have it. You don't want it on object, you're going to want it on property, which is going to use the active object, whatever it is. And so That way you can have individual modifiers set up. Now I'm going to end the tutorial in just a minute because this is more of a concept and introduction, and you can kind of see what goes into making an add-on. But I'll put an if-else statement in here, and I know some of this just jumps right into advanced, but I think that's probably a better way to do this, so you kind of know what to expect and you know what you should be doing and the workflow to achieve the results to get the type of add-on you want. So I want to do a little check to see if this modifier exists, because I don't want to accidentally add another subd and crash, especially if the user is moving fast or whatever's going on. So before the subd, and let me find it. Yeah, right here, right before the modifier is created, we're going to add an if-else statement. That's going to do a check. It's going to run a check behind the scenes. So Shift-A-S, I'm going to type in if. Now we've got an if execute, which is this, execute sockets. I think that's the word I've been looking for the last 20 minutes. And then we type in if. We have an interface as well. And you'll see this one just connects up on these, connects for these. You can do checks to see if something exists before you try to display it, because those two things are going to run you a lot of errors. If I throw an if else in here and turn this off, there's no condition. It's not true, so it's gone, right? It's not going to show up. But if I put something in this Boolean value that will automatically read the logic in here, and it'll read in the active modifiers, it's going to tell Blender's going to tell the add-on's going to tell Blender, hey, this hasn't been found, or rather this hasn't been found, so don't try to display this because it's going to shoot an error, and so we don't want that. Now we also want the execute right here, and so what are we going to do? We're going to look in the node groups. So we'll go back to Blend Data, and we want to get familiar with the Blend Data browser as quickly as possible. That's why I'm kind of just jumping you in. I'm going to click Reload, and I'm going to go to, actually we're going to go to Context for this. So I'm going to come back over here, mouse wheel, and I'm going to copy the context from the 3D viewport. Then I'm going to go to Context, Active Object. Let's go down to Modifiers, and now we'll see we have the active subdivision surface modifier, and we have the subd. This is pointing towards the view layer. And if I could pull this out for a moment, you'll see the view layer. It's going to point to not necessarily the view layer, but the active modifiers in the active workspace. There's a better way to say that, but we'll work on that in the next tutorial. But right here, if I grab this and plug this in over here and hit Shift V, we're going to look at this. Let's see if this is the right one. So this says modifiers super subd active object. So what if we don't have an active object in this scene? Well, that's going to throw an error. So let's go actually back in, go to data, and we'll go to objects, and for the second time I'll say it, the list is going to be like 2 miles long for this, but you can click this little search box right here. Once you've opened this, you can click a little search parameter here, and then under plane, the object, you can drop that down and then search under plane as well, so you don't have to like scroll through 5 million different things, which is a pretty big pain in the butt. So I want to go to this objects under data, which is reading this area, if you remember, and then I'll drop down plane. And once you're in here, you have a couple of options. You drop this down and you can do a search and type in something like MOD and try to get modifiers, or you can come down here to modifiers and just grab this object. But you can't search that way, but you can search for individual items underneath like plane. So if you were to search under plane, you would be searching this little block right here. So if I went back to plane under the search tag here and typed in get, you got to hit enter to kind of move off of it. It's going to show me everything that has get in it, and all these words have get pretty much, so that would work there. So there's my active subd. or rather that's my object modifiers. We're just going to read this area. So now if I come back over here, I'm reading modifier objects. And I want to switch this to property so it's reading the active object, because that's how we get the active object. And I'm going to need to plug this in, but this is green to a Boolean pink socket, so we don't want that. I need to check if this property exists. So Shift A S, I need to type in prop and see if I can pull up a property exists node, which has a Boolean output. Okay, so we'll select and plug that in. Then I'll take the teal socket to the property, which says no data, because this is your actual property output. The type of data you get out of this kind of depends sometimes, so it's a little sketch. A little bit more of an advanced tutorial for that one. But if we plug this in, it's now going to check to see if that exists before it actually adds a modifier. Okay. Then we can take these two, and I'll Shift D a copy, and I want to plug this in here as well. And so it's going to disappear anything. See, that's gone. I'm going to point that way. See, our Boolean is gone, but if I check, now it's going to display it because it's there. So if I check off of that, all I have are my buttons. So let's do a save real quick. Always save before you compile. We'll do a soft compile here. And I've got a trackback error, okay? And it says super sub D not found. Or you'll get a none type error. Those are very common. So at this point, you're just gonna have to go through your node graph, and you're gonna have to find out what the error is. Now, there's two ways, big ways of doing that. The easiest way is to basically do what I did here and make all this good and label it. I'll just tell you straight up, the error is right here because it's trying to display the super sub D. Just kind of give you the cheat code. But if you don't know that, let's go back to the serpents drop down and just pull out these settings. Now, this is the cool thing, and if you are a programmer, you're going to love this feature. Keep code file. Click that, and then the reason for keeping the scripting workspace is so we can come over here. You'll now have the serpents code log, and you'll see if you kind of scroll up, we got like 193 lines of code. I got some with like 10,000 lines of code, just a mediocre amount technically for some of the add-ons that are out there. So you got like 200 lines of code. It's not much. And this will not transfer a one-for-one with the code you see, but it is a way of doing it. So let's go back to visual scripting. Let's do a hard compile, Shift R. We have an error. Let's hit the little X. Sub D not found, line 116. I'll go back over into scripting, and I want to find line 116. And I find that I have a row levels, and it's literally pointing directly to the problem. So if I come back over here, I see row, right after a row node, levels. And that's a dead ringer for finding your problems most of the time. When it gets real complex though, that's not going to work out very well. So we need an if else right here as well. So Shift A S, let's type in if, and we'll grab interface. Now it has to be after the row node. So when you do that, I think we still have this copied, but no, it was a Shift D. So let's come down here. I'll copy that, and I'm gonna put the mouse down here so it points to that area when it does a copy. That way it's like you're not fighting it off screen type of thing. And I can just plug this directly in. Now that button shows up, and that's always a good sign when another button shows up, because that means you're working correctly. Now let's go to the console. And immediately compiled successful. So let's go ahead and do a Shift R hard recompile. Compiled successfully, no errors. Let's go ahead and delete everything. Now we'll add in our plane. It's all shade smooth. It's subdivided. Let's add our sub D. And sub D is not working. Let's find out why. Yeah, so I did it. And I'll leave the mistake in there. I put an if statement right before the new modifier, so that doesn't go there. I'm going to kind of compile that down just a little bit. Let's go ahead and add our sub D, and now it shows up. But let's check to see if we have any errors. I'm a little curious here. Shift R, and recompile. So yeah, okay. And just don't make these mistakes, right? You can get a little tired and mess things up. That's why you create save points. That's why you label everything. That's why when you press N in the end panel here, you'll have the main node graph, and then you could add a bunch more. All right, my parting thoughts, and this is going to be the end of this. I'll label this part 1 of Introduction to Serpents, creating add-ons. And one thing we're going to do next in the next one is we're going to do a loop for interface, so we can loop through and display collection properties. And I'll show you how to do that. So when we come down here and we want to display, and I kind of pause the video there so I kind of whip something up. So this would be added in the loop interface, and I'm going to cover this next time so it can display your modifier. It'll say something like modifier equals super sub D, which is over here. It's our super sub D, and the object attached to that modifier equals plain. And there's a little adjustment here or there to make it look a little bit nicer so you can see it, but that really helps. And if you don't have an object selected, you can throw up a little red flag for the user so they know that as well. So anyways, guys, I'll finish up and do some more of this in the next tutorial. I hope this was educational, and I will put this blend file on my Gumroad. And just on the way out, smash that subscribe, smash that like, keep up with the channel, because I'm going to be doing a lot of these tutorials. And, you know, as I go from an intermediate to an advanced user of Serpents, I will teach everything I know. So come on in, guys, and I'll see you in the next tutorial lesson. Happy blending.